and David Rue. We are going to get started. I will close the acceptance of public comment cards now and note that public comment cards that are not completed will not be acknowledged or received. Let me start, as is the custom here, with the multimodal roll call and ask for a show of hands from those who have commuted by bus over the past 2 weeks. Train. Bicycle. Pedestrians. All right, this is a Vision Zero crowd. I like that. Awesome. Okay, so colleagues, my recommendation for a couple consent items would be items 1 and 2. Any objections? All right, that will bring us to items 3 and item 3.
Item number 3 is an adopted budget recommendation relative to instructing Ladot to report on reducing the time it takes to review parking permit applications, resources required to potentially meet a 6-month benchmark, and fines for misuse of permit parking placards.
Great. We have staff. Come on up. So, colleagues, we put this item on the agenda because, as I think everyone on the council knows, the issue with permit parkings applications has been quite an issue in the city of Los Angeles. It's taken quite a long time. There was an instruction during the budget process to begin to look into a different way of doing this, and today is not the final report. Today we just wanted to get some preliminary thinking from the general manager on what the department can do to help us serve our constituents better and get permit parking districts instituted more quickly and more efficiently. As we know, this is one of the few ways that people interact with the city. They interact with the city by paying their DWP bills, which is not a particularly pleasant experience for many. They interact with the city when they get a parking ticket, which is not a particularly pleasant experience. And this is a time when they reach out to the city and they're actually asking the city to do something for them. And it's really, excuse me, Mr. Herman, I'm going to give you one warning. If you continue to be disruptive, I'm going to ask you to leave the room. I closed public comment, acceptance of public comment cards at 3:10. There were cards that had been submitted to this committee that were not complete.
You don't want to allow people to be heard and speak on later.
Thank you, Mr. Bond.
Anyway, as I was saying, this is often folks' first experience asking government for something, and we want to do everything we can to change their interaction with us so that it's a more pleasant and less time-consuming experience. So thank you to our general manager, Ms. Reynolds, for being here to sort of cue up what the department's thinking of.
Great. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak. As you may or may not know, last year the department put together a strategic plan called Great Streets for Los Angeles. So we had several benchmarks in that plan, and one of those benchmarks was to reform our current PPD process. Over the years, my understanding is that the city has taken a lot of different approaches to try and streamline this, to make it better, faster, to have it be more rational, with mixed success. And we do have a white paper on some initial reforms that we'd like to put into place. And so my perspective is that this issue is like many of the ones that we face in the department. Absolutely, there is a resource question. There are several vacancies that have been held vacant in that group for many years as the city's budget suffered. So there's certainly a person power issue, but there are also process issues that we need to take a look at and we need to streamline and make easier for folks. So that is something that has begun at the department. Brought on board a chief of staff about a month ago. That was one of her first assignments, was to take a look at the PPD process as somebody coming in from the outside and somebody who has overseen that in another city. To really sort of give us a new way of doing those things. So that's something that we want to get done sometime in the next few months. We also did get some positions in the budget, and we can, continuing to move towards hiring those as well. But I just wanted to make it clear that from my perspective, this isn't something that we just want to throw resources at. This is also something that we need to do, take responsibility for ways that we may or may not have made it more difficult than it needs to be for people to get this done.
I'm glad to hear you put that in that perspective. I think that's very good. I think there's probably a need for more resources, but I think that there's also a great need to sort of streamline and maybe make the process easier for folks, both the public and for your staff and our staffs as well. Well, I won't even get into it today. I'll give some recommendations on what I think should be included in the report, including some info on the backlog and all that stuff. But colleagues, any questions? Mr. Rick?
Well, I just have one. I just recently, my neighborhood just went OPD, and I applied to get the permit. When you're looking at the streamlining, could you also, are you also maybe, you're probably looking at already the application process? I mean, getting it for the first time? Because, yeah, so because when you first get the OPD or the parking permit, you have to go in person.
Correct.
There's no if, and, or buts, right? Is there a reason why?
There's probably a mix of reasons that over the years you want to verify, the person's identity. We need to accept payment, and we may or may not have the ability to do that online or over the phone.
Or by mail?
So these are good questions.
Yeah, so. If you could just look into that. I don't need an answer now. You could just.
Ms. Martinez?
Have you filled the principal engineer position that oversees the?
No, those interviews are supposed to be they just finished establishing the list.
That you were allocated the funds, or was it last year's? I don't.
Well, the list, the principal engineering list that allows us to hire was just certified in the last couple of weeks.
So we approved the money a year ago, but you just got the actual list from which you could make that hiring a couple weeks ago.
And why does it take that long?
So
That's why I was under the impression that we had just authorized the position in this year's budget.
So I don't want to speak out of turn and answer for personnel, but my impression is that, they were sort of bled dry just like every other department in the city. And until the loosening of the budget and the sort of unfreezing of the hiring ladder began, they were just spending all of their resources purely on, not on the hiring process, purely on, other sort of workers' comp, civil service issues. And so their ladder is unfreezing at the same time as ours, and so things take quite a long time. I know that the general manager has made it her top priority to shorten the period of time between, when you get permission to hire somebody and when somebody comes on board. The last estimate I heard of that was somewhere between 275 and 325 days. So trying to shorten that considerably has been one of her top priorities. But I think this is just what we're experiencing is what happens when a hiring freeze begins to thaw.
How many years was the position vacant for?
I don't know.
Several years, right?
I think so.
Predates me.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. Okay, so what I'd like to do is ask for a report in, say, 45 days in committee that, a pretty broad report that looks at reducing permit parking application review times.
Okay, great.
That looks at the resources required to meet a 6-month benchmark for processing applications. And answers a few questions. How many PPD requests are in the queue? And from what year do those requests begin? Has using the temporary PPD system as opposed to doing larger districts proved more or less efficient time-wise? 3, what is the status of the restoration of the full program, including full-size parking districts, not just temporary districts? Another question is, there was talk of reforming the guidelines several years ago. Is reform of the existing guidelines still under consideration? Sort of following up on Ms. Martinez's question, please include in the report what's the status of the new parking positions in the current budget. And also be curious to know when was the last time the department reviewed the parking permit fees. And then, so we would continue that item, have it back in 45 days or so after report is shown. Any objections? Okay. All right, so that is the direction.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item number 4 is a Weezer Bonin motion relative to instructing DOT in coordination with street services and the Department on Disability to report on the status of installing on-street blue curbs to create disabled parking spaces and recommendations to establishing a viable blue curb installation program.
Thank you. Before you start, we have one public comment card. Hillary Norton, who I suspect will not be talking in the voice of a sheep. I suspect you won't be making sheep sounds.
Yes. I know, sorry. Hi, my name is Hillary Norton, and I'm the Executive Director of FAST, Fixing Angelinos Stuck in Traffic, and I'm also here testifying as a trustee and board member for Orthopedic Institute for Children. We are in support of blue curbs, but not for parking, and the reason is because we need so much more pickup and drop-off areas for seniors, the disabled, veterans, and the concern about taking curb space and having parking there are so many times where our patients are waiting and trying to get picked up by various services because they are low income, they have no other ability to get their children onto a bus and other things, and they're having to walk through parking areas. They're having to load in the middle of the street because there's no place just to stop and get curbside pickup. So I would ask that in addition to looking at the parking for the disabled and others, that you look at pickup and drop off. It is so needed, and there's so many more services as people are starting to go car free, to really think about how many more people would use the disabled pickup and drop off areas and blue curbs rather than parking itself. So we support both, but really think about this loading and unloading because it is so needed, and it's really hampering the provision of good service and getting people to and from services they need without having to use an ambulance, by the way. More people want to use these services just to go and get treated for a broken arm, broken leg, other things that have them temporarily disabled, but they're having a very hard time getting picked up instead of just using a very costly ambulance, which is no good for our budgets for the city or anyone else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So DOT staff is here, and I guess sort of just to frame it, we have had for a couple years now effectively a moratorium on the blue curb program. I think a lot of council offices are like mine. They get lots of calls for requests. I remember, back when I started working for the city in the 90s, it was one of the things a council office could do pretty quickly for their constituents. And so could you tell us a little bit about how we got to this place where we have the moratorium, what the challenges are, and how we sort of see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Hi, I'm Crystal Killing with the Department of Transportation, and Angela Kaufman with the Department on Disability is here. In 2010, with the cut in staff and cut in budget, the Department of Transportation quit providing the service of installing new blue curb zones due predominantly to the staffing cuts that we took. In 2012, we started looking at re-implementing the program, and our review took us to the point where blue curbs are now considered ADA-type devices that require them to be wheelchair accessible. And there was new guidelines imposed upon the installation of them, both where we could place them and that addressed accessibility needs. Our review has shown that most of the original requesters are single-family homes that want a blue zone in front of their property. And most of those types of requests cannot be honored under the new guidelines because in most situations they can only be placed at corners. And the corner has to have a wheelchair access ramp and adjacent sidewalks. So there are potentially huge capital costs associated with the implementation of the blue curb. When we were initially doing our review, there was also challenges about how to deal with the city sidewalks, and if we implemented these devices having to do with our sidewalk situation. The Department of Transportation with the Department on Disability has looked at these requirements. We do think there is some area for new blue curbs. There are challenges that the city council needs to look at, including the guidelines for an acceptable application, or what's a qualifying application, and the levels that people may have to go to if they can't get the adjacent property owner or the neighborhood council office, so on and so forth, to agree to implementation if it's in front of someone else's property. There are also issues with funding, if there are capital improvements required, how those will be funded in light of the city's budget processes. But we do think there is opportunity to look at it in select locations. Do you have anything to add,
Angela,
Angela?
you want to add anything?
I just want to thank DOT. They have worked very closely with us to try to look at the situation. We average over 100 calls a month specifically requesting blue curbs from our department. It's been very difficult. It is difficult on a lot of our population. I came in at the tail end of the public comment on the pickup drop-off, and those are concerns for our department as well. What we've looked at is basically where we believe that DOT and DODR is we need council's guidance and funding behind the program to ensure that it can be a successful program with specific qualifications for people that are applying.
So we have at least hundreds then of backlog requests that we can't do anything with at the time being, right?
Right, but the bulk of them probably will not qualify for a blue curb where they would like it to be.
Right.
In some of our calls, when we speak with the constituents, part of some of the misunderstanding when individuals request blue curbs in front of their homes is that it's their blue curb. And in California law, a blue curb, anybody with a valid placard can park in the blue curb. So we get the calls to put the blue curbs in, and immediately when they were being put in, they were being utilized by other individuals. We were getting the same phone calls back saying, why are people using these, our blue curb zone? So when we process the information for the applications, we tried to make sure that people understood what it actually meant and that they actually qualified for it. Based on the specific needs of their family. And if the blue curb wasn't really what they needed more of a pickup drop-off, then our staff would work with DOT to try and find another solution other than putting in the blue curb, because it made more sense to do so.
Are there a lot of folks potentially who are in that backlog who really want a pickup drop-off and we may have found a solution already, or are we in a situation where we can't even find those solutions because of lack of funding and lack of direction from the council?
The loading issue goes into another ADA world that has similar type problems with the blue curb. This whole ADA issue is growing into a very large issue.
It sounds to me like the standards which we're getting from up above have put us in a situation where the perfect is the enemy of the good. Is unless we spend a ton of money on everything, we're not able to provide anything. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, the standards are, this is Salita Reynolds, the standards are put together by the Access Board, which is comprised of people with disabilities and technical experts. And so these are folks who are advocating for their needs. And so I think they might say, and they certainly don't speak, they're not a monolithic community, it's a huge spectrum there, but I think certain segments of that population would say that what we had been doing in the past didn't work and was insufficient. And so they would probably say that this new standard isn't even what they would describe as perfect.
But there'd be nobody who would say what we're doing right now is either what they would ideally want or an improvement over what we used to do, right?
Correct.
We're not doing anything right now.
So we weren't doing enough, and now we're doing worse because we're doing nothing.
I think we were originally before the new regulations came into effect, I think the city was moving forward and responding appropriately and installing as many blue curbs that met that criteria at the time. Again, the issues of the economy and the changes in the new regulations, I think, have led us to the position we are now, including the issue of our sidewalks and even the legacy blue curbs that we have. As we go through fixing our sidewalks and making repairs, those must also be brought into compliance. So again, it's a very complicated issue to the extent it's not just as easy as most people think of DOT going out there, putting a sign and painting the curb.
So again, the regulations were written by whom?
The Access Board.
U.S. Access Board.
And that's national?
It's federal, yes.
Federal, so those are federal standards. Do we have any idea, anybody, what other jurisdictions have done to respond? Because obviously those standards change for everybody.
Yeah, the city of San Francisco has adopted guidelines that are similar to the new federal guidelines. The city of Riverside has discontinued their blue curb program when they received a threat that if they didn't install an access ramp, that they were going to get sued over it, so they discontinued their program. Many of the other local agencies that had programs have not reviewed the new guidelines and are operating the way they always have if they had a program.
Do you have any other knowledge, Angela?
Everybody's doing something different now. We didn't really do a full research on it. From our standpoint, we want to follow what the federal guidelines are to ensure that we also don't get sued, again, on another front. And working with DOT as closely as we can, we believe that we can accomplish it. We can bring the program back and be able to respond to the areas that we can install the blue curbs and those that we can't, to try and find another solution if there is one. And if there's not, unfortunately, the way the guidelines are written, people who used devices such as wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, the blue curbs don't help them because they can't get up on the curb.
Right.
So that's the reason for the changes in the federal legislation to include, or the federal guidelines to include, the access ramps.
So I'm inclined to ask you guys to jointly work on a set of draft guidelines and staffing needs and recommendations to bring it back to us, but I want to see if my colleagues have any questions.
I have a few questions. So, with no formal program in place, there are residents that are creating their own blue curb in front of their own homes. Is the city liable for those types of blue curbs? For example, if we're accused of not meeting federal guidelines for disabled access.
I think potentially we could, but we would have to argue that it is not a legal installation. And therefore, when we do get complaints about illegal installations, we do remove them.
So you currently do get complaints about illegal installations and you go out there?
Absolutely.
The complaints we receive are that, how come my neighbor got it and I didn't? And when, we work closely, again, I refer it to Crystal and we look into that.
Do we have a cost estimate for establishing this program, more or less?
We don't, because the capital costs can vary radically. The new guidelines basically say there can be no obstructions adjacent to the blue curb, so potentially there is a curb ramp that may have to be constructed. A sidewalk may have to be constructed adjacent to the parking area. If there's a street tree, a power pole, anything like that, those obstructions would have to be removed or a different site needs to be found.
And would the city be responsible for all capital improvements? We would go all of it, such as curb cuts and ADA ramps.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you perhaps looking at a cost-sharing approach?
It would be very difficult to ask for cost sharing when this is not an exclusive space.
We can't pass on costs for reasonable accommodation.
All right, thanks. Mr. Weezer had a question, but I believe he's coming back from committee. He's not coming back. You want me to ask it for him? So his question was, in his district, in my district, meaning Mr. Weezer, we have heard complaints from the local neighborhood councils that raise the issue of the misuse of disabled place cards and how the installation of a non-street blue curbs to create additional disabled parking spaces is an issue because of because a disabled person may park for an unlimited period of time in a parking space for free. So what can the city do to protect residents from the misuse of misplaced disabled place cards?
So this is a question about placard abuse and placard reform. This is another issue that...
Which is apparently what his local neighborhood council has brought up.
Yeah, and, California has taken a few swings at this. It would require change at the state legislative level. In the department's strategic plan, again, we wanted to increase the number of placard sting operations that we do to improve enforcement, but honestly, it's trying to put out a forest fire with a spoon and a bucket because the abuse is so pervasive, and really it hurts people who have legitimate need for those spaces most of all because they are occupied by folks who may or may not need them. There are multiple places in the stream where things break down. There are unscrupulous doctors that will write you, the sort of permission to get the placard. The DMV does not have the resources to research and investigate and enforce or even keep their own placard issuance up to date, and local agencies, it's very, very difficult to prove that somebody has a placard that they shouldn't, because many people have an invisible disability. You can't see it. My traffic officers are not sworn, they don't carry weapons, and so these can be very dangerous situations when you confront people about this kind of thing. Requires at least 3 officers to go do that work. So we have since last year, we have been trying to work with the Department on Disability, Commission on Disabilities as well, to start a dialogue about the best way to prevent abuse, and that's something that will be ongoing that we continue to work on together.
And from the Department on Disability, the discussions always come about the abuse of, and people shouldn't have these placards. And, you saw me walk in here. I don't look like I have a disability, but I've had 3 back surgeries. So there are certain days that I have a very difficult time getting from place A to place B. And I get told off on a daily basis that I have an illegal placard on my car. So I think it's really important for people to understand that people do have placards with hidden disabilities. Just because we don't use devices or choose not to use devices doesn't mean that we still don't need it. And so the discussions that seem to focus on, the people that need it, make it very difficult because there's this whole group of hidden people with disabilities, as opposed to let's really start looking at how the program runs and how we can set up stopgaps so that this rampant abuse that has been happening doesn't happen, and to increase the fines and the penalties for individuals that do get caught using the illegal placards.
Just a quick question. I think one of the public comments mentioned it. Blue curbs, could it be used for pickup and drop off for these special access vehicles, and if so, how would it be a state change or?
They could, but if people are parked there,
right?
It's the access vehicles will pull up where they can. So if there is a blue space, they can. But oftentimes, just in the city that we live in, there are very few blue spaces that are empty at a specific time of a day.
But legally, can access vehicles because they don't have a placard,
Right.
So if they pulled up to a blue space or a handicap parking spot, could DOT ticket them, or?
Technically, if they didn't have a placard.
I don't know. If the driver didn't leave the vehicle, I think it'd be a gray area.
Yeah, our practice is not to issue a ticket when the driver is with the vehicle.
It might also have a plate, usually, on
Yeah.
the vehicle.
Some of the access vehicles may have placards. The taxi cabs, I don't believe, have them, but I believe they have something on their taxi cabs that indicate that they are doing paratransit pickup.
So again, that would back to the argument of more white curbs, right? Pickup.
Passenger loading, you mean?
Passenger loading
Sure.
and unloading.
Thank you. Okay, as I said, was interested in having a report back with some draft guidelines on how we can start doing the CURB program, status report on new staff positions and needs, so we can put that in the FSR that comes after the report. You had 45 days on the permit one, how much time would you like on this one?
We're ready. Someone, you want to comment?
We're just piling on the work, folks, so be very honest.
We're what?
85, are you 85%?
Yeah, probably 85%. We're just going to need guidance, I think, regarding some of the funding issues, or feedback from the council on what they
Well,
might
in the
consider.
report, let us know what you need answers to, in
Okay.
addition to what you provide us. So I'm sensitive to the fact that we keep discussing issues with you, but where you don't have enough staffing. So I'm trying to be supportive on how much time you need to do this. So how much time do you need?
I think 90 days would be fine.
Okay.
And we'll bring somebody from Public Works with us as well, maybe.
Yeah, we'll try and get,
And in that time, if, let me just be clear on some of the things I think should be included in the report, is specific state and federal code sections that have necessitated the changes. I just want to get everything in the written record. Check with other local municipalities for their best practices or what they may have done. Include some cost estimates for administering the program, the engineering and construction requirements, the application process, anticipated construction timelines, and as I implied at the beginning, I'd like you to work with Department of Disability, obviously, on this. It looks like you already are, of course, but that'll be it.
I will add that we have met with BOE and Street Services, and in the conversations we had with them, their thoughts were that we should maybe do some sort of pilot-type program to see what the impacts would be. But one of the questions we had is if we opened a pilot program, would there be an expectation that people would get something in the end?
Yeah, there would be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that leads to different problems then.
Right. Okay, so we'll look forward to the report.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up is item number 5.
Item number
And,
5. I'm sorry, is the DOT report relative to the bike share program for the City of LA.
So let me start with 3 public comment cards. Laura Cornejo, John Howland, and Hillary Norton. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Cornejo, Deputy Executive Officer of Active Transportation with Metro. I am here to support staff's recommendation. As Metro has worked towards developing the countywide bike share program, it has been very much a collaborative process of which the City of Los Angeles has been an integral part of. Metro is very much committed to ensuring that the downtown Los Angeles pilot is a success, not only as we look at closing the first last mile gap, but also in ensuring that those that work, live, and play in downtown have another viable form of transportation. We look forward to continuing to work with the City of Los Angeles as we take this from a plan into a reality and having bike share in the ground by next year. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Howland with the Central City Association. CCA is very supportive of the bicycle sharing program and the downtown pilot in specifically. Our members are very excited about this. We've had several meetings with Metro, with Ladot to discuss the rollout and how it's going to work. And Ladot and Rubina and her folks are to be commended for the work they're doing in reaching out and trying to accommodate members who are members and property owners who have some concerns about this. What we would like to do is see this extended and expanded to include some private properties as well as public rights-of-way as this pilot progresses, and see if there are ways to incentivize the program in order to encourage some of our private landowners to put up bike share kiosks. So we are very supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm also here in support, and in part of the conversation that this leads to some of the mobility hub projects that we have adopted as part of the Mobility Element 2035. In addition, as John Howland said, to look at how this could be integrated onto private property, and that looking at this as another way of changing the parking definitions. You can have reduction in parking for bike parking, but also that bike share could qualify instead of just bike parking, because I think this would help increase the proliferation on the private side. I want to commend Metro and LADOT for their vision in creating this project and involving the public as rapidly and as robustly as they did in order to help pick the locations and in order to just work with us as organizations to talk about what an ideal bike share program would be. They are to be commended for how this was created and executed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, staff can come on up. So first of all, since Mr. Weezar's still downstairs in the homeless committee, I think it would be appropriate for me to amend the MOU to move the pilot to Venice.
Smooth move, Mr. Chair. Smooth move.
I'm extremely familiar with this, having heard it in my other capacity on the Metro Board. Very, very excited about the prospect of getting bike share in Los Angeles. Would note that subsequent to sort of the staff work on this at the city level, a number of us at the Metro Board have been trying to fast forward this program so that we would get more areas of the city covered by 2017. That was included in a recommendation and a vote at Chair Ridley Thomas's direction at the last meeting in July. So that's also one of the goals of the program, is to get this in more of LA's neighborhoods much more quickly. That's going to be a challenge, of course, but it's certainly the goal. So I'm intimately familiar with this. I'm extremely excited. I've used bike share in other cities. I think it's going to be great for visitors, great for residents, particularly downtown, where folks like to go car-free and car-light. And it's a potentially great addition to our first mile, last mile needs. So I'm totally jazzed about this. Want to get into the weeds a little bit with you on some particulars, but perhaps you could give a little bit of an overview for my colleagues and let us know your thoughts on the MOU.
Sure. So this is Salita Reynolds, the General Manager. I think this is a very exciting moment for the city. I think this is a great day, getting this finally before policymakers for your approval. Bike share is something that my own observation is that dollar for dollar, it has a more powerful return on investment even than infrastructure in getting people to try a different form of getting around and to normalize riding a bike, so that it doesn't seem like something that you have to be, you have to wear special clothes or that you have to be in amazing shape in order to do, but that it's something that can be enjoyable and a really strong good for the city as a whole, for people to feel comfortable trying it out and then perhaps to find ways to weave it into their everyday life. The way that bike sharing works is very similar to car sharing, but vastly superior because it doesn't rely on fossil fuels, and also because you can pick up a bike in one location and drop it off in another. It is a program that is aimed squarely at all short trips, and we know that about 47% of the trips in Los Angeles are shorter than 3 miles, which is a perfect bike distance. And it's meant to be easy to use, and it's meant to lower the barrier to entry. So the idea is that when you have these bikes in the public right-of-way, they have an incredible safety record. They can be something that is easy to pick up, jump on, drop off, for any short trip that you have. The things that contribute to a system's success are first and foremost the density of station placement. So there's no reservation program. You're meant to be able to just walk up and pick up a bike. And so in order to be able to rely on it, you need to know that if you walk up to a station and say it's just after the morning commute at Union Station and that particular bike share station is empty, that there'll be one within a block or two that you can go to and grab a bike. And similarly, when you come to drop one off, if you find the station full, it's easy for you to drop it off nearby. The typical fare structure for most of these systems is that the first 30 or 45 minutes are really inexpensive, and then the price begins to climb. And in part, that's to make sure that this is not a competitor to traditional bike rental. So this is not about a recreational bike rental that you keep for 8 hours and ride down the boardwalk. This is about, us jumping on a bike and going down to LA Live for lunch on a work day, and then being able to come back quickly and easily, or being able to jump on a bike up at the First and Hill Metro Line station and cruise down to 100 South Main, for example. Which I'm very much looking forward to. So, that's kind of a general sense of what bike share is, how it will work in Los Angeles. That makes it different is that it is a true partnership with a regional transit agency who views this as an extension of public transit. So think about it as a new public transit network that is extremely, operates on extremely smart technology. And that the Metro Board, through its leadership, has made it very clear that this program must also take on equity in a substantial way. So we are working with the same vendor that launched in Philadelphia. They received significant assistance from a nonprofit to make sure that the bike share stations in Philadelphia were available truly to all residents. And that has to do with tap card integration here. It has to do with fare integration with Metro. It has to do with using every means at our disposal to get the unbanked access. And also doing a lot of outreach to make sure people understand what this is and how they use it. So that's kind of an overview. I'm happy to take questions. I have my staff here that's leading the program as well.
Mr. Rowe, any questions for Ms. Martinez?
It's a comment, not a question. Thank you for the briefing that you gave yesterday. Very exciting, very promising. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, and actually Diego Cardoso, a friend of mine from Metro, who I expounded to him too, when you guys expand this program or when you're doing the study, if you could try to include like the Griffith Park and the Hollywood areas and whatnot, like the Hills area. And I know the Metro was telling me it gets more difficult when it gets hilly, but if you could look into all of those, because the first and last mile is a very important aspect of our whole transportation system. And this is a promising move. And if you could make sure in your studies to include the semi-hilly areas as well as areas where people could park in certain areas, maybe go to the Greek Theater and drop it off there and whatnot.
Just so through the chair, just to respond to that, City Car Share in San Francisco did receive a significant federal funding grant to incorporate e-bikes into their bike sharing system. These bikes are quite heavy, and that's because they have a lot of software in them, and they're meant to, it's sort of one of the ways that you make them theft-proof and also safer. You just really can't go, 20 miles an hour on this thing. But maybe, one of the things that we should take back is to have some consideration for whether or not future phases of the program could incorporate electric bikes.
Who just installed e-bikes? I just saw it on the news. Was it San Diego or Pasadena? Somebody just do the bikes you just mentioned?
The electric bikes?
Yeah. Did someone just do it last week? Was it Santa Monica? What did they install in Santa Monica?
They're not electric.
Oh.
But they have a few little pilot bike share stations that they have, yeah.
I really need to learn how to ride a bike now, right?
It's so easy and fun. It's going to be no problem. We're going to go to the river.
But I have a question. If Metro is owning and operating the kiosk, why are we paying for 50% of the capital cost?
So part of that was Metro Board policy and direction to staff to come back with a plan for how to implement bike sharing. So part of those agreements about how cost sharing would work were done sort of at the Metro Board level. So that I will say, I'll say this.
Question. I mean, I think it's a good thing. It's a good idea. But
Yes.
It is
So I'll say,
operated. It's so.
two things. One is the program that I managed when we launched in San Francisco, it was 100% of the obligation was on the local agencies. And so sometimes it can seem unfair, but in comparison, it's actually a pretty good deal. The second is that all of the revenue that comes from the advertising on the kiosks will come to the city directly. So that is a revenue stream, and all of the user revenue that's generated will go towards offsetting the costs of operating the system.
Yep.
So,
Are these white bikes? I think I saw you on one.
They're like, I was with one with Mr. Ridley
Ciclavia,
Thomas.
right?
At Ciclavia, yeah. Yeah.
They're with the Metro logo?
Yeah, they got a little Metro logo on them, yeah.
So how do you anticipate that the bike kiosks, will they have a tap reader? Or how-
you will be able to use your tap card. Yes.
So, and just to sort of elaborate on the cost sharing thing, what Metro was facing was, Metro was not initially an agency that saw bikes as part of its mission. Diego has been working very hard to help change that, thank you, along with your very great staff. And there were a number of cities in the county who were starting to look towards doing bike sharing. Some of them moved very quickly compared to Metro, City of Santa Monica being one of them. And it's really important if we're going to have bike share that we try to have an interoperable system so that you can go across the boundaries of a city. And so what Metro came up with was an idea where, because it was not something it was going to do itself, it said, well, if this is going to start happening, let's try to build interoperability and let's incentivize folks, and we'll build the umbrella, and then folks can become a part of it. So what we've done is if you're a city going forward and you're not using a system that is part of the Metro system, you'll be on your own financially. But if you want to use the Metro system, we'll do cost sharing with you.
So you're first going to roll out 1,000 bikes in downtown?
Correct.
And then you're going to phase in Venice, and I think in the Valley,
Hollywood.
Yeah.
North Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that would, how many more bikes would that add to the 1,000?
Total,
4,000? So 1,000 in
4,000.
Venice? Or
well, 4,000 total for all of the expansion areas.
And Santa Monica is not included. They're doing their own thing.
They're doing their own.
Doing their own thing.
Yeah, they do that to me a lot. So I guess I have a question for the city attorney. Because Ms. Martinez wants to learn how to ride a bike, can we actually do a meeting on bicycle, moving around?
As long as you don't have a quorum.
I think I've just lost cause.
My younger brother learned at age 40.
I'm 42. I mean, all right, so there's...
You're much less, you're much
My
more
daughter
graceful
said,
than he is.
Mama, you have to believe in yourself. I know. You heard my story.
She's like your little Oprah.
Love it.
All right, so without objection, it will be the recommendation of the committee to approve the MOU and to encourage Ms. Martinez to get on the bike.
Thank you very much.
Last item is item number 6.
Item number 6 is a Rubanen motion relative to instructing LADOT to report in regards to background checks for all transportation operators within the city of Los Angeles. We had this item in committee 2 weeks ago, and you instructed our office to report back in 2 weeks with recommendations on elements of an independent study and related to the regulatory oversight of TNCs, and the committee recommended the DOT be involved as well as LAWA, LAPD, and the Personnel Department. As a start, I put together this matrix that kind of starts off the discussion. It highlights the agencies that are regulating TNCs and other transportation providers in the city. We have LADOT, who does taxis and emergency ambulances, private ambulances, and some of the courtesy shuttles, and the general manager talked about that at the last meeting. We have the LA Police Commission, who permits the valet drivers, and we have the executive director of the commission here if there are any questions. And then we have the CPUC, who oversees the TNCs and other charter party carriers. So this is the beginning of the information. Since we had our meeting, we had the Trade, Commerce, and Technology Committee meet and discuss the NELA with TNCs at the airport. We had the council discussion yesterday, so we've had some additional discussions on the whole issue since that time. Based on Councilmember Rue's motion, I think this matrix should be expanded with DOT and the others for the report back that would include each of the transportation services providers working within the city limits beyond what we've already identified, the governmental agencies and third-party contractors who carry out the background checks for the services, and then the sources of the background checks, whether it's LiveScan or Department of Justice or FBI or whatever that might be. The chairs requested additional information on the background checks, including how far back they go, the frequency of the information for convictions and things like that. That should probably also be included in that. And then based on the other hearings, the committee may also want to expand the information further to include some of the other issues like Social Security tracing and screening, zero policy for drug and alcohol use and things like that. Councilmember Wu also instructed staff to include an impartial analysis on the difference between the fingerprint background checks and other criminal background checks, including the DMV pull notice, and that was echoed yesterday in council about is the fingerprint background check really the gold standard, and look at the study done by the National Association of Professional Background Screeners as that applies to the taxi permitting and the TNCs. And lastly, based on the information collected and put together, the motion directed that the report would also include best practices and recommendations for conduct of background checks. I think that covers most of what was discussed here and at the other hearings. There was one other issue that was raised about the number of taxi drivers who have been suspended due to driving violations and or criminal background checks. I think that was answered last committee meeting, but we may want to update that and put that in the report as well. But that's everything, and so we're here to take any questions and recommendations you have.
Great.
Yeah, wow, that's very comprehensive and thorough. I'm pretty sure you covered it all. And thank you for that direction. And I think I just want to make sure, and we discussed this issue out in not just in another subcommittee, but in City Council as well. But I just want to make sure that the root focus of this is, we want to provide a venue for the city family, all the different departments, for this to be a study and evaluation, right, of the best methods to protect public safety. So it's not just what's out there and what's being done, but an actual evaluation of what works, what doesn't work, and what you would recommend possibly not doing. It's not just adding on, but it might be possibly streamlining, because I know some of the motions that we introduced last week kind of asked the city attorney and all these other departments to do reports. So I don't mind if you consolidate it to, to save time. And the secondary thing is, once we do that evaluation, that study and evaluation, we need to have some sort of standard, because the whole goal is to give an accurate information of safety standards to the public, right? So once we do this study, how do we let the public know? I mean, this is not what I'm telling you to do, just throwing it out there. Is it a grading system? Like the restaurant grading system, A, B, C. I don't want to create extra work, and I don't want to create extra bureaucracy for the various transportation providers. So it's got to be within what's effective, not just bureaucratic. So, but once we do this study, we got to let the public know, this is safe, or this, some sort of, how do we get this word out? How do we get this information, this great study that we have to protect the public when it comes to transportation providers, disseminating that. So,
Great.
As long as we have those two in focus.
I just have a question. How is this different than what we did in council yesterday?
Well, council was talking about the NELA and oversight of TNCs on LAX.
There were a series of friendly amendments that were accepted by
Yes.
by the chair, and one of them, a lot of the amendments.
There were several that are under our purview. There are three related to DOT. I'm drafting a plan to streamline taxi regulations, CAO to look at funding for updating the taxi permitting technology, and then DOT to report on the actions necessary to require taxis to comply with the same background checks as TNCs. So that would fall under our committee. We can wrap that into the study, or they can come as separate motions as the clerk normally would do it. The other motion that also went through was requesting the city attorney to look at we've assumed we've just been preempted by all the PUC off the airport. If that is not the case, that would give us more opportunity to regulate TNCs, and that report is supposed to come in 30 days, so that would come before. So
And that'll come here as well.
I just want to make
Yeah.
sure we're not duplicating our efforts.
No, in
No.
fact, what Mr. Rue's motion did was it sort of laid the groundwork for, I think, a lot of Mr. Krikorian's motions.
Yeah.
Mr. Krikorian's motion identified that we, and some of my stuff, identified that we may want to have uniform standards for the different types of transportation carriers. What this report does is sort of give us the framework of what those standards are and how they differ. So it's the foundation for the other stuff.
And additionally, if the report comes back, and it seems like the report back is going to come around the same time, if the report comes back and says, after extensive research and study, it turns out that this type of method is is the best method, and we didn't think of it. I mean, in that study, if some other new background check system comes out that we never thought of in the meeting, was it yesterday?
Yes, it was.
Oh my God, no concept of days.
Yesterday.
Yeah. Yesterday, then we could go back and I'll be more than willing to introduce a motion to add it. Or if it turns out that it's ineffective to do all these things, then we have now a concrete study that shows us a better direction. So we have an opportunity to modify, add, subtract. So.
Okay. So it sounded to me like that's a great scope of work, great start. And we'll keep that in committee and look forward to the finished product.
Great. Thank you.
All right, that clears the desk. We are adjourned.